I think you're still on mute.
Oh no!
Welcome.
I think I was talking to myself. Thanks, Carolyn. So, welcome everyone. In case you missed that, so thank you so much for joining us today with Carolyn for our Ask Me Anything session. So, my name is Jiamin, and I'm the lead at Parcel Monitor, the leading platform for e-commerce logistics insights. So, with our studies and together with industry experts around the world, we hope to provide our community members a platform to acquire knowledge and exchange insights about retail, e-commerce, and logistics. So today, we're extremely excited to have with us our AI logistics and supply chain expert, Carolin, founder and COO of FERO.Ai. Welcome, Carolin, again.
Hi, Jamin. Very nice to be here. Super excited. So, as you mentioned, I'm the COO. What do we do at FERO? Just as a quick intro to put some context on the next 30 minutes that we have. So, at FERO, we basically work on automating logistics transactions. So that would be anything from rate exploration over invoice creation, over fleet management and order creation. And we do that with TIA, our Transport Interactive Assistant, which basically is a bit like Siri, if you want to imagine it. And TIA mimics roles from your sales, operations, customer service departments in your logistics organization.
Cool. Thanks for sharing that. And I think everyone here is very excited on artificial intelligence. And especially, I think when you think about AI and you think about logistics and supply chain, they seem to be totally complete opposites, right? So one is a very kind of old process industry with a lot of baggage. On the other hand, AI is cutting edge technology. So even before the session, we already had a lot of questions come in. I think very interesting range of questions. We have things about your work experience, you have things about FERO.Ai. We also have things about AI, of course. So just to keep it warm both of us up a bit, let's start with something more about your work experience. So maybe Carolyn, so could you share with our audience a bit more about your work experience thus far, and how has it led to where you are now? So basically the founder of FERO.Ai.
No, that's a very good question, and I think as all of us, particularly when you're an entrepreneur, it doesn't bring you straight to being an entrepreneur. There's a lot of experiences that come together, and that's what makes it then interesting to put it into a business. So for myself, I actually started my career with Maersk as a management trainee. They had a program that was referred to as the MISA program at that stage. And it had, what was very wonderful about it is it had 400 different nationalities that joined that program from different business units of Maersk. So you got to know, the shipping side, the port side, the land side. So exposures on various different elements. And of course, also because there were so many different nationalities on that program, you got to know the problems from different perspectives as well, right? Like, because a problem in China is obviously not the same as the problem in the Suez Canal or as a problem in the center of Europe, and even all logistics related. That was, I actually started with them in the Netherlands. Then I moved to the Suez Canal to work at the port there in a marketing function. And it was really how we bring ports to become not only like an operational asset, but how do we commercialize, the port business in a better way and become how would you call it, a multi enterprise facility. So not only attracting our own assets, which was at that time Maersk Line, but also how can we serve other clients? And that was a very interesting process. From there, I moved to West Africa to be on the side of the shipping line, also with Maersk Line, and then on to a competitor that was in the port industry. Also working on port infrastructure assets, concessions within the emerging markets. So what taught me like at that position was really, how do you build a business? What do you need to take into consideration? Which are the bottlenecks that you have when you have a port ecosystem? The port ecosystem is not just only the vessels coming in, but it's the whole landside logistics around it again as well, and customs, etc. So that part was a very important element that I can bring into my everyday life now as well. And finished then an executive MBA just to kind of with London Business School, bringing some of the theoretical knowledge and round it off. And then in 2016, I moved to the region, to Dubai, with exposure to the GCC. At that time, still, I was working for the Deputy Foreign Minister of the UAE. building up a logistics portfolio for GCC companies and combining them into a holding company to really leverage the knowledge that like highly qualified logistic companies have here in the region. And the last stop before FERO was the exposure to the tech scene, and that's really when I rediscovered my entrepreneur need and the willingness to kind of start my own businesses, like being with Uber. So Uber was a very big organization at that stage already. I was running the business development region for Middle East, Africa, and Pakistan. And that was a $2 billion revenue region for them. But really, how fast things get turned, exposure to Silicon Valley, innovation, new ideas, really the tech side of it. That's then when I really kind of formed my idea. I need to kind of start my own thing, and this is how I joined FERO together with my business partner Abhinav Chowdhury, who's the actual founder and inventor of the product in itself. So that's a bit about my story and what brought me to FERO.
Well, that's a very interesting and I would say very rich story that you have. What I'm hearing is that from Netherlands, then to the Suez Canal, to UAE, and then a nice mix of experience in the logistics and a nice touch of tech there. So very, very interesting story. So thanks for sharing, Carolin. Okay, so going into more into FERO.Ai, so we also have a question on that. And somebody here wants to know one interesting project that FERO.Ai is working on at the moment. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a few of them, but maybe if we pick one of them. So what I've told you earlier, like in terms of the automation piece, what we bring to our clients, where TIA mimics roles in certain functions such as pricing, operations, customer service departments, as well as overall logistics coordination. So how that can then be executed for some of our clients is in terms of demand aggregation. So what do I mean when I talk about demand aggregation? So we're used to platforms doing demand and supply aggregation, like Uber for freight, for example, right? But that will be a platform in itself. So we really focus on being a SaaS business. So we give opportunities to do demand aggregation to various players in the industry. So that can be a logistics player, but it can also be a distribution and supply chain, distribution or manufacturing player that still would want to aggregate demand. So what do I mean by that? As an example, we're currently working with one of the largest drink suppliers or soft drink suppliers in the world to work on demand aggregation for their bottling distribution. How that comes out is basically right now it is extremely difficult to scale individual orders from small shopkeepers. And you will know that in quite a few of the places, like in geographies such as Africa, as well as when we're looking at Asia, there is a lot of small fragmented shopkeepers that would still be selling soft drinks. So how do you actually get access to that data? When they buy, how they buy, how much they buy. How do you get access to be able to take their orders, have an overview on how the order gets delivered, have an overview when it gets delivered at scale? Because the topic is always at scale. You can do it manually, you can use your Excel sheet, you can have a middleman that kind of drives around and takes the orders and whenever he comes by once a week. Again, that is very, very backwards. So what can you do to kind of bring scale to these type of organizations? This is done by TIA, our Transport Interactive Assistant. We do it by having the integration via WhatsApp. So it means that we give a mini ERP to the small shopkeepers that can order with the interactive assistant straight into the ordering system of the big bottling company. And the order can be dispatched immediately. So this is really solving a lot of problems for large players of that kind.
Well, that's really interesting. I think being able to streamline that, especially down to these small players, that is extremely difficult because I can imagine they themselves have a lot of manual processes already, a lot of Excel sheets, I can imagine. So I think really interesting story. Thanks for sharing that. And that also kind of brings me to the next question, right? So more generically, everyone is very interested on artificial intelligence, AI, and how does that relate to logistics, right? So the third question that I have here is, So how does AI help to automate logistics processes in general? And one question that we always get, I think it's always in our heads, is so is AI and automation the same thing, or how are they different?
Very good question, and I think it's still, it's still very often a topic. Automation is really like a repetitive task, right? So if you want to compare it with anything, you would take an assembly line and you can automate a certain part of the process on the assembly line. But that's not the technology behind the assembly line. I think this is the way we should look at it. Another way of looking at it is like when we deal with artificial intelligence, is really much more complex in mimicking human functions and really mimicking how we as humans would execute a process. And then ideally you would bring in machine learning, which then not only uses algorithms, but actually extends the algorithm through machine learning to become better and better. One of the ways that we apply that within FERO is we actually use machine learning tools to estimate typical customer behavior during a delivery process better. This allows us, instead of taking static data of how long it takes to deliver and just take whatever the distance from A to B and then a static time per customer, we can learn that if we deliver certain goods between 2 and 4 p.m. to this specific customer, we will actually have a faster truck turnaround time that we can, with our software, offer to our end clients than if they were to deliver it, let's say, between 11 and 1, because there might be a certain blockage. So this is how we use, AI and machine learning to really take data, learn from that data, and then use that data to optimize existing operations.
Thanks, Carolin, for the explanation. I think that's really clear. And to be frank, right now, I think in this largely a very digital world, especially with the pandemic currently, I think data, whoever has data is king, right? So with data, you're able to learn from it, improve your processes, find what's the best optimization for your processes. So yeah, thanks for that. I think that's a really clear answer. So I think the next question is also related to AI. And I think it's something that people with your business hat will always think of. So is it possible for businesses to measure the success of their AI investment? And if yes, how?
Yeah, no, very good question. And I mean, the simple answer is yes, it is. And I think from a commercial perspective, if we were not able to justify the investment in a product like we actually offer to our clients, we would not be able to have the same commercial success or the same traction than what we have been able to achieve in the last period where we sold. So how do we measure the impact of AI, or in simple terms, it's always your return on investment. Maybe let's unpack that a little bit, right? To not have just one big word, but really, we look at how do we reduce cost. We reduce cost by, improved employee experience. It means because you actually take away mundane tasks from your employees, you actually get increased employee engagement, and you can use your knowledge workers to work on something significantly more complex. And we all know that finding employees and finding, talent at the moment is extremely, extremely hard. So we're really hitting a nerve of the time on that. So that can be measured quite simply. Also, I mean, how many tasks can you actually execute with using TIA instead of using a human being, right? Usually you can handle, let's say, as a person, you can handle 5 to 6 customer accounts and turning quotes and replying to customers and handling maybe 60 emails an hour. If you use our Transport Interactive Assistant, I mean, it's unlimited on how many replies you can actually draft and how many messages you can handle, because you can do it at scale and at the same time, so synchronous, which is not possible as an individual. Also, other ways to measure it is quality service. So when you measure your customer engagement and your customer satisfaction, very often that's related to how fast was your reply whenever you had a customer query. And then also, what is your conversion rate? When I say conversion rate, is like how many quotes, for example, have I shared with my customer? How many quotes of those have I actually turned into actual contracts, which is then revenue generating activities for the business? That's another way of measuring it. What else can I think of? Maybe, Yeah, I mean, simple, like in a way where you look at reports, right? Comprehensive insights. Are you able to take better decisions because you have real-time data to access now, right? We very often forget how legacy-driven some of the, or most of the industry still actually is, because the systems that we work with currently in the logistics industry are systems of record keeping. They're not systems of engagement. We offer you a system of engagement, so you get live data, you get live engagement with the software that we provide to you with TR.
Yeah. So yeah, I think it's clear for me as well. I think what you're saying is that basically two big areas: cost cutting measures, so how much cost do you reduce, how much productivity do you improve, and also additional sources of revenue. I think yeah, thanks for that. And I think we have a question coming in on LinkedIn. I think from Tarun. I think he's curious about a bit more about your technology, on what kind of ERP can you integrate with, or does FERO.Ai support ERP integration? I guess that's the question because a lot of logistics and supply chain companies use very legacy ERP systems. Yeah. So Carolin, what do you think?
No, that's a fantastic question. So we integrate with any ERP because we believe that that's the future. Because the problem right now is that the legacy systems are very hard to integrate with. That's why it's not easy to engage. So we use RESTful APIs for the integration. So anything from CargoWise to SAP to Oracle, TMS. So any ERP we're actually able to integrate with our software, the Transport Interactive Assistant. We also offer our own in-house ERPs for road freight, in case someone does not have a system available, just to kind of help them improve if it's, let's say, a greenfield business when it comes to systems. But overall, yeah, any ERP that would be driving the logistics sector at the moment, we integrate with.
That's great to hear. So I think Tarun, hope we answered your question. I think that was a very clear answer. And also brings me to the next question that we have on legacy systems. So Carolin, tell us, was it difficult to convince companies, especially in logistics and supply chain, to shift from legacy systems towards the usage of AI?
Very good question, right? Let's take a look at what actually recently happened in the market, right? We have the crunch on the supply chain on our everyday agenda at the moment, right? Because we can feel it, like no matter if we work in logistics or not, we know there's issues in the supply chain. So that drive and understanding where it comes from let's say, obviously COVID, let's say, in Europe, some of it due to Brexit. We also had, an e-commerce boom. So these type of macroeconomic drivers have brought logistics and the need for supply chain resilience on top of the agenda of a lot of C-level executives. So according to McKinsey, there's around over 90% of businesses, large enterprises, that want to increase their supply chain resilience. So the attention is there, and I think the timing is very, very right. And people understand that there is a need for, coming back to what I mentioned earlier, for not just systems of record, but actually systems for engagement again, right? Because you want to leverage the data that you have, that you were able to collect with your existing ERPs. You want to be able to break down data silos. You want to be able to have a collaborative platform, right? So that's another thing that we're able to provide, that we link these various systems and we link intermediaries. So no matter if you are a shipper or if you are a transporter or if you actually are a freight forwarder, no matter from which side of the business you're coming, as a SaaS solution, we can link all of them together, and that's what brings the real efficiency. So yes, it's getting easier and easier because it's on top of the agenda for a lot of C-level executives. Having said that, you still will have some businesses that would rather prefer to work on Excel sheets and phone calls and that mix. It's getting less and less, and I think also keeping in mind margins are getting thinner, so people are looking for ways to scale faster without extra cost, to be able to take more seasonality, or not only seasonality, to be able to take more fluctuation in the system, what we've also all experienced now with COVID, right? You have some periods that are extremely busy and suddenly it's not very busy. So being able to then capitalize on the incoming revenue when it's coming versus having to then hire extra people and having a lag, that's very valuable.
Thanks, Carolyn. I think that's a very, very interesting thing to that you're saying, because maybe a few years back, people will be quite, I would say, hesitant to adopt AI, but with all the whole macro kind of economic circumstances, etc. Like you said, I also feel the supply chain crunch, although on a micro level, because I'm just doing my e-commerce purchases. But yeah, 100%. Okay, so I think also next question is more on the sustainable and green logistics side of things, just to change things up a bit. So someone actually asked this question on FERO.Ai. Do you actually use AI to support sustainable and green logistics activities? Yeah, interesting question.
That's no, it's an absolutely relevant question. So when we use our AI for, or when our clients use our AI, the main thing what we do is give them benefits of being smarter in how they allocate their resources. And when I talk about resources, I talk about how do they allocate, for example, their transport assets. How do they allocate their drivers? How do they get the fastest route, right? So all of this is kind of like breaking it down and using less resources for the same amount of business, or for the same whatever throughput, whatever it might be. And that, of course, also means if you use less trucks, if you use less fuel, that means we can save our clients in tons of CO2, or not only our clients, but also the world, tons of CO2 emissions. So this year alone, we were able to save 8,500 tons of CO2, which is equal to, kind of translated into something more tangible, that is equal to taking 9,000 cars off the streets for a whole year. So that's a whole city without cars, a whole small city, not an Asian city, more like a European city, but like a whole city without cars for a whole year, right? Yeah. Another example, actually, now I'm just thinking of it. Another example, because we talked earlier about demand aggregation, right? So one of the things that we also see is there's a lot of companies that struggle with return logistics. And when we talk return logistics, immediately we think e-commerce, but it's not only that. We also have certain companies that have products that want to be recycled. So let's say there's a coffee maker that has capsules. They are all very keen on recollecting the capsules. But usually the cost of recollecting it without using the right systems is too high for the coffee maker to actually be able to afford to take it back. So we provide the software that actually enables demand aggregation for aggregating the recycling, and that allows them to kind of deliver a very eco-friendly product to their end customers.
That sounds amazing. Thank you so much, Carolyn. So on the small city thing, so I live in Singapore, and that's a really small city for an Asian country. But yeah, that aside, yeah, I think that's really interesting. So optimization, reducing resources. So thank you for sharing that. And I think that also answers one of the comments that we have here for, I think, order routing, I believe. So how do you optimize order routing? And that's similar to what you shared on the sustainable and green logistics side of things. Okay, so one other question we have is specific to reverse logistics. So the question here is, so how can we apply AI for reverse logistics? And what is the difference between applying AI between reverse logistics and normal logistics operations?
Yes. So I think, like in a simple way, you have lots, so when we look at normal logistics, you have a warehouse and then you deliver it out, right? So basically you have a warehouse and then you deliver it out. Versus with reverse logistics, it's exactly the opposite. You have tons of individual points and you need to deliver that back to a warehouse. So the efficiency or the route planning and the constraints that go into it are very different constraints than having on one day certain elements that need to be delivered out. You also have on the one side less constraints because some of the things do not have the same urgency to go out or like to come back, right? When we talk about recycling, there's a bit more flexibility. It's, durable products. So making sure that you work with the constraints in the right way to deliver a product that's reliable for the customer and for the end customer, but then also that's cost efficient, is a very important key. So it's really on how do you combine the constraints that you have between delivering goods out, picking goods up, when are the right drivers, how much space does it take up, is it urgent, is it not urgent? That is how we apply AI.
So from what I'm hearing, you really have to have a good understanding of the whole processes and logistics. I think both rivers or normal logistics operations, and identify key areas on where you can apply AI to optimize that. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Also, maybe adding to this, I mean, one thing that's very important to think about is the consolidation element as well, right? So sometimes ideally you want to consolidate delivering goods out for collecting goods again, right? So having that right balance from a consolidation point of view is key as well.
Thanks, Carolin. Exactly that. So, okay, so we also have one question more on the, I would say, ethical side of things. This always comes up when we talk about AI. So here I have a question about, okay, so AI we know has numerous advantages from a cost perspective, revenue perspective. We've all heard that earlier on, but unfortunately has some ethical issues as well. So I think from a standpoint, Carolin, as the founder of an AI company, so how can businesses go about addressing these ethical dilemmas while applying AI?
Yeah, very good question, and definitely also something that's often in the talks. If you ask me, it starts at the top, and the tools that you have from the top are basically culture and rewarding the right behavior. So making sure that you hire the right people, right? That is the one thing, like how you create culture, because basically culture defines the decisions when you're not in the room. So making sure that you are aligned on values and on behavior, that then of course reflects in the technology that you build as well, right? Because it's all proprietary technology that we're building in our case, for example, right? So if there is the right way of approaching things, that is the first safeguard. Having said that, we also get away slightly easier because we are B2B business. So we don't fall into the bracket where we actually, the AI that we work with might be biased towards a consumer, because we actually deal with goods and processes. So we have we have a slightly easier problem statement in that sense when it comes to be ethical on AI or not. Yeah. But yeah, again, I think it starts with culture. It starts with rewarding the right behavior, and it starts with being critical at any point of time and keeping the conversation open and alive.
Okay, thanks, Carolin. So we have a question that comes in. I think it's more of a comment, maybe to get your views. So I think Rolf here says, so in South Africa, we do have our own delivery trucks, and then this actually does deliveries back to the stores. So there's actually no cost involved. So I think in that circumstance, I think what Rolf is asking is, so does AI still apply? How do you still apply AI in such a circumstance?
Yeah, so I think the question is not, it's not at no cost when the truck goes back empty, right? There is still a cost sitting there somewhere. So the question is, can you actually load that truck on the empty return with more goods? Can you optimize that? So you basically use your assets better. That would be the ideal scenario in that way. And not always, this is also assuming that things are recycled synchronous, which is not necessarily the case, right? Because you might deliver something out, particularly when we're talking about the coffee example, what I brought about the capsules, you might deliver something to someone and they might still want to return something at a much earlier point. How do you optimize it then, right? So then it's actually, you were not in the area, you still need to pick it up because you don't want to say, oh, by the way, I only come once a month, right? Because that's exactly the thing that we want to break down. We still want to have great customer service to reply as fast as possible, but do it at a cost-efficient manner without having to do an extra trip, but combining it and consolidating it with other trips. But thanks for the question, Rob. Good question.
Yeah, Exactly. So, yeah, so I think it's also a very interesting point that you brought up, the cost of returning goods, picking back the parcels. I think recently I read this article, really interesting. Some retailers are opting to just not offer returns, in the sense that to let consumers keep their goods, because based on the data, it's actually more expensive to pick up the parcels, and it's cheaper to
Yes.
just leave it there.
Spot on. That is
Very
exactly,
interesting.
yeah, that's exactly the point. So that's what we're tackling with the demand aggregation that our Transport Interactive Assistant TIA can offer.
Yeah, exactly. So looking that we have about just a couple of minutes left, so maybe we can end with one last question. I think this is a really interesting question. So more of a forward-looking one. So it's Carolin. So what kind of trends do you foresee emerging in logistics next year? So for 2022.
Good question. I think there is still plenty of more room for systems of engagement. So when we talk about, so not only in our case, but like workflow automation, being able to leverage data that we have collected in logistics more. Digitization is quite well covered, but there's still quite a push needed in the industry. And yeah, I think also the realization on the complexity of the supply chains, I don't think it will necessarily go away yet. So there will still be a drive for, as I mentioned earlier, for more resilience in supply chains. So more budget being spent on that. I think also the VC market is kind of realizing that this is a very interesting space. So that's going to be, if there's more VC money flowing into innovations like ours or other innovations, of course that then drives the development of the sector overall as well, and brings benefits to the industrial end users. Yeah.
Right. Thanks, Carolin. I think very much looking forward to 2022. And maybe also to ask a follow-up question on that, right? So given that trend, so how do you see FERO.Ai growing in the next year as well?
Oh, great. Yeah. So we're right now working on our Europe plans. So we're going to be present there very soon. We already have clients there. We just want to have a physical presence there as well. And for us, we're looking at the map as like any big logistics hub. This is where we add most value with automation in our collaboration tool TIA. So looking, Rotterdam, Singapore, of course, is a big place. South Africa is definitely on our maps. North Africa, we already have clients, so expanding that further. So that's kind of like in the medium vicinity, and then very soon as well, looking at the US market in the medium term.
Great, I think that's fantastic, and looking forward to maybe seeing you in Singapore one day when we get the restrictions kind of relaxed a little bit more. But thank you so much, I think, Carolin. I think it was a great session. We covered a range of topics, I think, from your work experience, FERO.Ai, to really hard questions about AI, like cost analysis, justification, ethical dilemma, all the way to, of course, how FERO.Ai can solve logistics kind of operations and issues. So thank you so much again, Carolin, for joining us today at Parcel Monitor.
Thank you so much.
So thank you so much, of course, to our audience for staying with us and listening to our AMA session. So do remember to follow us on LinkedIn for more such sessions with experts like Carolin. And we look forward to seeing all of you again during our next session. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.